Welcome back to the Noble Arms Manual. In this chapter, we're going to look at all the different members of the deck, get a quick summary of what they do and if they are relevant to the deck. We will go into ratios for specific categories in another chapter. So, to start off, we're going to look at our normal summons, and we have 3 of them. Noble Knight Midrite is one of the oldest cards in the archetype. It is a level 4 semi-Gemini monster. It is treated as a normal when face up on the field, but when equipped with a Noble Arms equipped spell, it becomes an effect monster that is level 5 and dark. It has the effect that if it is the only monster you control, you can special summon 1 Noble Knight from your deck in defense, and if you do, destroy 1 equipped spell you control. In theory, this is our strongest normal summon. It allows us to tutor anything from the deck, and in combination with the re-equipable arms, can start any combo we have. There are, however, reasons this card is not as good as it first appears in the modern deck, and we will get into that in the normal summon chapter. Next up we have Noble Knight Boars. It has the same vanilla effect on the board, becoming a level 5 dark as Midrite. However, its effect is to reveal 3 Noble Arms cards from the deck, have the opponent randomly add 1 of them to the hand, and send the rest to the graveyard. This is probably one of the most critical of the classic knights, and there are even some lists, which I will showcase later on, that revolve entirely around resolving his effect. Boars is spectacular for what he sets up, however, he does not start combos on his own unless you're willing to guarantee it by using 3 Durandal, in which case there wasn't too much point to resolving him in the first place. He is a critical part of the deck, however, the design has aged somewhat. Finally, the newest of the normals is Noble Knight Ogier. Ogier is a normal summon that, when summoned, will send a Noble Arms card or Fire Warrior from the deck to the graveyard. Although it doesn't set up as much as Boars does, it has a more versatile pool of things it sets up, and depending on what extender you are going to combo with, it may be preferred to Boars. It is one of the most common normal summons in the deck, either for the ability to set up the trap or to set up Gearfried. Now we're going to look at the extenders. Noble Knight Renaud is the first we're going to look at. It is probably the best extender in the game for this deck, in that it summons as long as you have a Fire Warrior of any sort, giving it the broadest pool of cards to combo with, and when summoned it becomes a tuner. Furthermore, when summoned that way, when it is summoned at all, it can target 1 Fire Warrior or equip spell that is banished or in the graveyard and add it to the hand. Because it has both extension and recycling in its effect, as well as being a tuner, Renaud is one of the most powerful effects that you can resolve, and you will almost always be running it. Gawain is our oldest extender, still run in most builds, although some builds have started to shift away from him. He is an unconditional, non-once per turn. If you control a light normal monster, you can special from your hand in defense position. This card combos with any of the monsters that become normal on the field, as well as our actual normal. He also does combo in niche cases with some unusual cards. For example, if you have a Nibiru token because your board was wiped and 2 of these in hand, you can summon both of them and make plays. It doesn't come up terribly often that you would have that available to you, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. Noble Knight Kustanin is an interesting case because the card was translated differently when it was brought from the TCG, where it launched as an exclusive, to the OCG. In the TCG, its effect is more restrictive, and therefore the card is not as popular. As this is a TCG-focused guide, we will primarily be using that effect for reference, but I will explain both of them. In either region, if you control a Noble Arms equip spell, you can special summon this card from your hand. Unlike Gawain, this is a once per turn. When this card is used for the Synchro, XC, or Link summon of a Noble Knight monster, that monster will gain an additional effect. In the TCG, that effect is, during your main phase of this turn, you can normal summon 1 Noble Knight monster in addition to your normal summon or set. And you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn, except for Noble Knight monsters. It is a mandatory effect, which means even if you do not intend to use the extra summon, you will be locked out of non-Noble Knight monsters. In the OCG, there are 2 key differences. You can normal summon any monster, not just Noble Knights, and it is optional if you wish to activate the effect. Therefore, if you do not wish to use the extra normal summon, you do not have to be locked out of non-Noble Knights. For this reason, Kustanin is a much better card in the OCG, and we will regularly hope that we get it. Next up is Noble Knight Oliver. Introduced with the rest of the Noble Knights, this card can be summoned from your hand as a level 1 tuner by sending a Fire Warrior or equip spell from your hand or face up on the field to the graveyard. As a relatively easy to summon extender and tuner, this card is pretty key to many of your plays. In addition, it is arguably the best of the Infernobles that equips from Grave. I did not mention this earlier, but all three of the primary level 4 Infernobles have effects that can be activated in Grave to equip to a warrior on your side of the field. The Oliver gives it targeting immunity, and Ogier gives immunity to destruction by card effects. Targeting immunity is very powerful and can allow your boss monsters to easily resist many decks, such as Sky Striker, that have no non-targeting outs in the main deck. Finally, we're going to look at Noble Knight Artorias. Although not an extender in its own right, we do tend to run it in combination with Unexpected Die, giving us another free level 4 named body that can then combo further with Gawain. It is a relatively beefy monster, however it is a normal monster, meaning it doesn't do anything on its own. After the extenders, we're going to look at the utility knights. These are knights that are generally run at 1 or in some cases 2 if you run them. Some are better than others, and generally when building a Noble Knight deck, you're going to pick a few of them that you think best serve your build and run those. To start, we're going to look at Noble Knight Dristan. Dristan is a removal and protection card with 2 primary effects. While you control another Noble Knight monster, your opponent cannot target any monsters you control with less than 1800 attack except for this card, with card effects and attacks. This means that this card can be used to protect things like Isolde from Utopia Double plays. It can be used to protect Appaloosas while they get low in their attack from destruction by battle. It's a very good protection effect, it's just a little tricky to set up in most builds. In addition, if this monster becomes equipped with a Noble Arms equip spell, once per turn you may target a face-up card on the field and destroy that target. It is a mandatory effect, which means that you cannot summon him and then equip an equip spell you want to use without risking that effect firing. This does make it somewhat tricky to combo with, however, the trade-off is Dristan is a very powerful removal card. When you run him, he can be an option to tutor on the opponent's turn to float arms onto, and I'll explain that later. Next up is Noble Knight Hector. Hector is a dragon ruler. It can be special summoned from your hand or grave by banishing 2 Noble Knights from the graveyard. He is a level 5 dark, and his other most notable effect is that when you use him to Synchro or Xyz summon a Noble Knight, that summon cannot be negated, and effects that activate on the chain immediately after the summon cannot be responded to, similar to Magical Meltdown. The reason this is so good is it lets you easily set up plays into your Xyz monsters, which then grab your equip spells. I will demonstrate plays like that later on, but he is one of the more popular utility 1-ofs even today. Ignoble Knight of Black Lanswain is another level 5 dark. He used to be a little more integral, but he has fallen into favor lately. You don't generally run him. His effect is you may send a face-up light and normal monster you control to the graveyard, special summon this card from hand or grave. You contribute 1 Noble Knight to add a Noble Arms card from your deck to your hand. This card was typically used in the past to tutor equip spells when you didn't have access to one, but given that access is relatively easy to get now and his level is somewhat awkward, he's only used in very niche combo builds and for gimmicky plays such as agent combos. This is pretty much never run. Noble Knight Peridor is a level 4. He is 9 normal on the field, but he still becomes a level 5 dark when equipped. If this card is sent to the graveyard while equipped in the equip spell, he will recycle a Noble Arms in the graveyard. He has really never been good. He can be run as a gimmick, but you're generally not going to run him. This was Peridor. His father, Pelennor, is a little better. He has the effect that you can target a Noble Arms equip spell equipped to him and a face-up monster your opponent controls, destroy them, then draw a card. But in exchange, this card cannot attack this turn. He's not bad in and of itself, but a little slow, and Dristan tends to do his job better. If you're going to run one of the popping knights, Dristan is typically preferred. Noble Knight Ivan is an interesting card because when he first came out, he was actually one of our better normal summons. However, he was then relegated to utility, and these days is not typically run in the majority of builds. He's typically a 0-of. However, in some more control-focused builds that have been experimented with to get away from synchro lines, he does see a resurgence in popularity. When equipped with a Noble Arms equip spell becomes equipped to him, you can special summon a Noble Knight token. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of the turn that are not Noble Knights. This makes him a way to get into Isolde off of just him and an equip spell, similar to Madrite. However, he does lock you out of non-Noble Knight plays, which can be restrictive. He also has an effect that while he's equipped with the Noble Arms equip spell, all other Noble Knights gain 500 attack. This can be useful to help push for a game in some situations, however, damage is not typically a thing we struggle with, not that common. Noble Knight Bedweir is an interesting card. You do not run him for his on summon effect, which is when normal or special, you may send one Noble Arms equip spell from the deck to the graveyard. Instead, when he's run, it's for a rather gimmicky but relevant play that I will demonstrate later, that allows you to, during either player's turn, once while this card is face up on the field, target a Noble Arms equip spell and move it from what it is equipped to another appropriate monster on the field. This effect lets you get up some pretty unique effects, in particular relating to the Infernoble Arms, which are coming up. He is sometimes run at 1, it just depends on if you want to resolve that effect. Noble Knight Guashavat is another normal monster on the field. He does not become a level 5 Dark, he just becomes an equipped monster when equipped with a Noble Arms. He has a pretty nice effect though. You can target a Noble Knight monster in your graveyard, add to your hand, and if you do, destroy one Noble Arms equipped spell you control. Good recycling, however this deck has many options for graveyard recursion, especially following the release of Renaud, and so while he used to be mandatory, he is not run much anymore. Noble Knight Brothers is a long-standing card in the deck. It used to be a mandatory 3 of, shifted down to 2, and these days he is typically seen as a 1 or 2 of, depending on what you want to do with him. He does have an on-normal summon effect, but you are not typically going to be using this. But that effect is when normal summoned, you can special summon up to 2 Noble Knight monsters from your hand, and for the rest of the turn you cannot summon non-Noble Knights. Once per turn, you can target 3 Noble Knight or Noble Arms cards in your graveyard, shuffle all 3 into the deck, and then draw a card. This is one of our best recyclers and not once per turn. The reason you might sometimes want to run 2 of him is that when you have 2 of them in play, you can loop all of your resources infinitely. If you only run 1, while it is technically possible to perform an infinite loop if you are very specific, it is extremely difficult and not going to come up very often. For this reason, decks that want the ability to grind for literal ever will typically run 2, whereas decks that are content to grind for several turns in the mid-game but eventually run out of resources will typically run 1. Infernoble Knight Roland is a level 1 with a quick effect to target a face-up monster you control, equip this card from your hand to the target as an equipped spell that gives it 500 attack. During the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was sent there this turn, you can add 1 Fire Warrior monster, except Infernoble Knight Roland, or 1 equipped spell from deck to hand. Each effect is once per turn. Roland is an interesting card because he is run at 0 or 1 depending on the rest of your build. The ability to equip something to your monsters on your opponent's turn is relevant due to our boss monster, and when you do not have the ability to make the other card that lets you do that as part of your combo lines, you typically want Roland to search off of Isolde. However, if you do have the ability to make that other monster, the level 5 Roland, then you typically won't want to search this one. You'll want to search directly the card you'll be using in turn 3 instead. Some builds will run him and some won't. It really is a matter of personal preference and personal build. Infernoble Knight Astolfo is another interesting one because he can go in either the tech or extender section. He has 2 effects. One is to banish a Fire Warrior from hand or graveyard, special summon him from the hand, then you can make the card's level become the level of that banished monster. You can banish the card from your graveyard, special summon this banished card during your second standby after the effect's activation, then you can special summon 1 Fire Warrior monster that is banished or in your graveyard. This effect is once per duel. Astolfo's summon effect as an extender is a little tricky because it is very resource intensive if you're trying to initiate plays, but it can be great for extending through disruption. Astolfo therefore becomes much better going second. He is run at all sorts of ratios, 0, 1, and 3. It's a largely matter of personal preference and how you feel about him. His second effect is very powerful, but very rarely will you resolve it because it is just so slow. With that said, you often do run 1, as our combo lines will involve milling a level 1 anyway, and he's not bad to have in play. Finally, Infernoble Knight Magi is pretty much the only utility knight that is generally considered a mandatory 1. While he's an equipped card, he gives immunity to destruction by battle, but his more relevant effect is that once per turn when sent to the graveyard, you can shuffle into the deck 3 of your other Fire Warriors and or Noble Arms cards that are banished in your graveyard and draw 1 card. It is similar to Brothers, but it can access the Banish Zone, which lets you reuse the trap, which we will get to later. Very powerful in a loop, with one fatal downside. Because he shuffles in as part of the cost and not effect, you cannot shuffle in extra deck monsters, which you can in Brothers. This makes it a little more restricted in what you can recycle, but you definitely want one. So, after all of the utility, let's talk about the 4 non-Noble Knight but in-theme monsters. First is Merlin. Merlin is a Lone Fire Blossom, however, he locks you to only Noble Knights for the entire turn you use his effect. He does have a Grave effect to Quick Effect Synchro or Xyz Summon. This does not come up pretty much ever, even if you did run him, but it can come up. However, because he locks you from any outside or non-thematic summons and is Prime Ashbait, you will not see anyone running him. Even before Infernoble was released, he was generally considered to be terrible. Morgan the Enchantress of Avalon is our in-theme hand trap. On paper, she's actually not bad. When your opponent activates a card or effect, while you control a Noble Knight monster and a Noble Arms equip spell, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, destroy an equip spell you control, and if you do, negate the activation. She's not terrible. She can serve as a pseudo Called by the Grave to protect from hand traps on your turn or disruption on the opponent's turn, and destroying Noble Arms cards can lead to fun interactions such as refloating some onto Tristan. However, generally when you run her, it's because you wanted to. I run her for fun sometimes, and not because she was optimal. And that is because even if you are running hand traps in that particular build, she is generally not better than generic hand traps. She is not searchable in theme in any way, and she is only live while you have both a Noble Knight and Noble Arms on board, and your combo line does not always meet that condition. She leaves too many open gaps. She's not a bad card, but in general, you're going to prefer to run more versatile and universal hand traps. Gwynethar, Queen of Noble Arms, is a monster that acts as another equip spell you can use from the graveyard every turn. You can target one Noble Knight monster you control, equip this card from hand or graveyard to that target. The equipped monster will gain 300 attack, and then if it is a light monster, it will also have the effect that if the equipped monster would be destroyed by card effect, you may destroy this card instead. If it's a dark monster, it is a Catastor. If the equipped monster battles an opponent's monster at the start of damage step, you can destroy that monster, then destroy this card. Gwynethar is actually a pretty good card to get into the graveyard with Boars. Having access to equip spell every turn makes it easier to reliably resolve effects that require them, both that require equips for their own effects, such as Boars and Madrite, as well as cards like Oliver and Gearfried, which will need equip spells to get rid of. It can also combo well with Ector for a Catastor you can bring back every turn. However, because she's only useful once set up and doesn't contribute that much to your turn 1 game plan, she is not run that often. It is a choice you can make if you wish to try and use her. Finally, Lady of the Lake is a gorgeous card that unfortunately we just don't have a way to use well anymore. She cannot be used as a synchro material except for the synchro summon of a warrior type monster. If this card is used for a synchro summon, banish it. When it is normal summoned, you can target a Noble Knight normal monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. If this card is in your graveyard, you may target one level 5 Noble Knight you control, reduce its level by 1, and if you do, special summon this card from the graveyard. So why is she so bad? Because you can only target Vanilla Arthur, she can only revive off of level 5s explicitly, and her status as an Aqua Tuner makes it awkward to use her. When we did use her, it was for combos involving milling her with Dawn Knight. However, she has simply fallen out of favor as we don't have a way to reliably use her. Ironically, last time she was used was before we became a synchro-focused deck. Having finished up on the relevant monsters, let's move into the back row. So first up, Heritage of the Chalice, one of the best cards, mandatory 3 of. It is a Rhoda that can search for a Noble Knight monster or Noble Arms card from deck or graveyard. Because it searches from either one, it can be ashed or belled, so bear that in mind. However, it searches pretty much every card in the deck and is absolutely fantastic. It does have an additional effect. If a Noble Knight that was equipped with Noble Arms is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you may add this card back from graveyard to hand. Last chapter of the Noble Knights is Bougie Incarnation. It's a cool card, but a little slow, so we don't typically run it. If your opponent controls a monster and you control no monsters, you can target one Noble Arms Equip spell card and one Noble Knight in your graveyard, special summon the monster, and if you do, equip that equip spell to that monster. While a cool card for comebacks, it's only good turn 3 if you've been board wiped, and even then is very telegraphed. It's not something that comes up often enough to warrant running. Glory of the Noble Knights is interesting because it was considered garbage for a long time, and then a 3-of, and now some people, including myself, are starting to cut it. It targets a Noble Knight monster you control, equip it with a Noble Knight, or with an equip spell from your deck that is a valid equip, and it is once per turn. In theory, it's actually very good. It can protect from Gamma, but by searching out Destiny, it can give things protection, it can trigger Charles, and it can act as another copy of Rhoda by searching Durandal. However, in the Rhoda function, it is typically only used in that capacity if you're trying to get a generic extender, and because it has to target a Noble Knight, it is trickier to use it before you've started committing cards to board. For that reason, I have started to cut it in some builds, replacing it with more extenders, and I am liking that direction, so I'm going to start advocating for that in future builds, unlike previous ones where I called it a mandatory 3-of. Finally, we have our field spell, Noble Knights of the Round Table, a card that would be absolutely fantastic if we could search it for free, if we had something like a Striker Dragon, but we don't, so we don't run it. The card has effects that resolve depending on the number of Noble Knight cards on your field and in your graveyard. At 3, you mill a Noble Knight. At 6, you revive a Noble Knight and then equip it. At 9, you recycle a Noble Knight, and at 12 exactly, you draw 1 card. If we had a way to reliably search it for free, this would be a card that allowed us to every turn, or on our first turn end phase, get Ogier on board to mill once again. It would be fantastic. However, it doesn't actually help us set up our board, and so because it's not a free combo piece, we are not going to run it. Now let's look at the equip spells, and there are a lot of them. In some builds, you only want to run a handful of them. However, most United builds actually run almost all of them. They all serve different purposes. Destiny gives the monster once per turn immunity to destruction, and when it is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, including by game mechanics, so if the monster it was equipped to was removed from field, it can re-equip itself to a Noble Knight monster you control once per turn. This effect is shared with the first 5 Noble Arms. Gahatin gives a 1000 attack buff, but on every one of your standby phases it will drop the attack by 200, and it has the re-equip effect. Caliburn gives a 500 attack buff, and once per turn you can gain 500 life points. This card is typically either run in main or sided because it can win you games in time. It is a soft once per turn, which means with the right hand you can resolve it 4 times in a turn and gain 2000 life. Clarent is an interesting one. When it's equipped, you can pay 500 life points. The equipped monster can attack directly this turn. That effect combos with some other arms we have to enable certain OTKs, which we will use to bypass threats such as Arrival. Why bother removing something when you can go over it? Afriditur is arguably the best of the classic Noble Arms because it actually generates positive advantage. Once per turn, you can target a set card your opponent controls. The equipped monster loses exactly 500 attack, and if it does, destroy that target. This is one of our best ways to clear back row early on, and is a staple of the deck. It's also the last of the arms to have the re-equip if destroyed effect. Excalibur is the final classic Noble Arms. It grants targeting immunity, and on its own we don't run it for that because Oliver does the same thing in a more reliable package. Instead, if you run it, you use it for its rank up effect. During your turn, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, target 1 Noble Knight Xyz monster you control, and special summon from your extra deck 1 Noble Knight Xyz monster with a different name, using that target as a material. This allows you to cycle between your kings, and is a very powerful effect on turn 3. Typically, if you run it, you're milling this card on your first turn using his hold, and expecting to use this effect on turn 3. Next we're going to look at the 3 Infernoble Arms. These were added with the release of Infernoble Knights, and they differ in 2 key ways. They are structured differently in that they can equip to any monster, not just warriors, and they have 2 effects. The first effect is an ignition effect you can activate by sending this card to the graveyard, and the second effect will activate if it goes to graveyard because the monster it's equipped to left the field. Hawkclare, its ignition effect allows you to target a monster you control You cannot attack with anything other than that monster. However, that monster can attack twice. This is combined with Clarent and Gahatin typically, all primed onto a Charles for 4,000 direct twice. I will show you how to do that combo later in another chapter. Typically, like all of these, you'll run 1 if you're running it. Durandal is the only one you run at 3 because its ignition effect is to search for a level 5 or lower fire warrior. It's a Rhoda. It can get any of your extenders, including some non-thematic ones, and is a very powerful effect. Its grave effect is to summon a level 5 or lower warrior from the grave. You'll typically be resolving this on the opponent's turn if at all, but if you do it on your turn, bear in mind that it locks you to warriors for the rest of the turn. Joyous has the ignition effect to recycle a fire warrior from your graveyard, and its graveyard effect allows you to special summon a fire warrior from your hand. One thing to note about the Infernoble arms, I forgot to cover Hawkclare's grave effect. Its grave effect is to target a face-up monster on the field and destroy it. Hawkclare actually is often more used for its second effect, unlike the other two, because you can link away what it's equipped to and then get a pop. The other thing to bear in mind is that the Infernobles can be equipped to anything, and so you can actually put them on your opponent's cards. This allows you to make more unique plays and threaten their grave effects in unique cases. So I mentioned the Bedru play, and I'll demonstrate it later, but just to summarize, let's say you have Hawkclare on board, and your opponent has something that you know they want to link off. If Bedvir puts that onto the link material monster, then the opponent is threatened with the fact that if they do link it away, you will get to pop what they've summoned. So stuff like that are how you can threaten. That sums the arms. Let's cover the final 3 back row. Until Noble Arms are needed once again is an incredibly powerful trap. Typically you want to put this in grave turn 1 if you can. However, while it used to be that was the end goal of all of our hands, it is now treated more of a nice to have. You'd rather resolve your combo typically, but if you can, you want to put this in grave. You'll typically put either 1 in grave with Ogier or 2 with Boars. You run 2 typically. Its effect on field is to reveal cards from the top of your deck up to the number of Noble Arms equipped spells you control. Add 1 to your hand, put the rest back in any order. That in and of itself is a nice effect, but the better effect is that if it's in your graveyard, except the turn it was sent there, you can banish it, special summon from your deck 1 Noble Knight monster with a different name from the cards you control or are in your graveyard. This means that by setting up 2 using Boars, you may summon 1 monster on your opponent's end phase and then 1 again on your turn, and have 2 monsters to play with without committing any additional resources. It is a very powerful effect and critical for turn 3 kills. Avalon is a very cool card, but you're typically not going to resolve it. It is very difficult to get away with, and so you don't run it. There are gimmicky builds designed to resolve it, but they are typically seen more as fun experiments rather than serious competitive builds. Target 5 Noble Knight monsters in your graveyard, including at least 1 Artorigus and 1 Lanswain. Banish the targets, and if you do, destroy all cards on the field. Oliphant Horn is a card releasing with Infernobles. It is similar to Avalon in that it's a cool effect and powerful if it resolves, but it's too tricky to set up and you don't typically want to bother, so you won't run it. It has 2 effects: either banish an equipped spell you control to destroy 1 card on the field, or destroy 1 Roland monster you control, then special in defense position up to 3 Fire Warriors from your deck whose levels equal 9, but negate their effects. It also locks you into warriors. Cool card, cool effect, you just don't typically run it. These 6 cards are all Noble Knights in name, but they don't have any synergy with one exception, so you don't typically run them, but those are Sherry's Knights, which released in Synchro Storm, I believe, Noble Knight Joan, which is just an old classic, Celestial Sword Iatos, which is the Guardian equip spell, and Noble Arms of Light Dunal, which is the Adventure Token equip spell. Now, these only share a name because in Japan, the themes are Holy Knight and Holy Sword, and these are very generic fantasy names, and so they bleed into other themes. However, I will call out the Adventure Token one specifically because there are control builds that get run on occasion focusing on adventure, because the Adventure Engine can get you a named Noble Arms, which can be useful for resolving Boars or Madrite, as well as generic synergy. It's not terrible. It does work. I will probably make a chapter focusing on that if the Adventure Token survives the next ban list. I'm just not entirely convinced it will. The last two main deck cards I want to look at are not actually Noble Knights, but they might as well be in spirit. They're mandatory for the deck, and so I figured it was worth covering them. Immortal Phoenix Gearfried is a very powerful monster that can be summoned from the hand by banishing an equip spell from field or graveyard. At the start of damage step, if it's attacking, you can equip a face-up monster on the field to this card. Add an equip spell that gives 500 attack. And when a monster effect is activated, you can send an equip spell from your field to the grave to negate the activation and destroy it. In United, this card is a mandatory 3. It's an amazing card. You try and get it out as early as you can if you on your turn, because it can protect from hand traps. It is powerful removal. It can get around things like Dragoon, which can't be targeted or destroyed because it's a non-targeting equip effect. Overall, it's just an amazing card. Fire Flint Lady is just one of the most generic extenders warriors have access to. If you control a warrior, you can special summon this card from your hand. It does have a second effect to send from field to grave to special a level 4 or lower warrior from hand. That's not typically something you're going to be doing. It does come up on rare occasions, though. The lady is unique because she can be searched off of Durandal. For that reason, you're always going to want at least 1, and many decks are running 2. I don't often see 3, just because if you're running that many extenders, you typically want to vary up your names to make sure if you open multiples, you can use them both. Okay, finally, let's cover the extra deck, and then we will be done with this section, and I can give my throat a break. So we're going to start with the Link monster, one of the most powerful Link 2s in the game. It has been used consistently by meta-relevant decks ever since release, but it belongs here in its home. Isolde, Two Tails of the Noble Knights is a Link monster requiring only 2 warriors. When Link summoned, you can add a warrior monster from deck to hand, but for the rest of the turn, you cannot normal summon, set, or special monsters with that name, nor activate their effects. Because you cannot use the card you search, you use this to get something for turn 3, or use it to get something you're going to use on the opponent's turn, such as Roland or a Gearfried to summon off a Joyous if you set that up, or you use it to search something you're going to use as a discard fodder, for example, a Fire to discard with Oliver. This does become relevant in Therian's build, which I'm going to cover in another chapter, but the main key with Isolde is her second effect. You can send any number of equip spells with different names from your deck to the graveyard. Special summon 1 warrior monster from your deck whose level equals the number of cards sent. You can only use each effect once per turn. This is how you start all of your plays. There's all number of things you can pull from the deck. One of the most powerful effects, expect opponents to try and negate it if they can. Next, we're going to look at the Xyz monsters, and we have 3 of them. Isolde you'll typically run at 2 of, just for extra deck space, by the way. The Xyz, if you're running them all, you're going to run at 1 each because you just need space, but they're excellent toolboxes. Sacred Noble Knight of King Custennin is one of the best rank 4s for breaking boards. It can be made with 2 or more level 4 Noble Knights. You can detach any number of materials from the card, target that many cards your opponent controls, return them to the hand. If this card is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the grave, you can special summon 1 Noble Knight Xyz monster from your extra deck, except Custennin, and if you do, attach this card from graveyard to that monster. Custennin is fantastic for breaking boards because he threatens removal that must be stopped, and if he is stopped within a negate that destroys, he will then float into something else, which will threaten more removal, typically rank 5 Arthur, so let's actually do that one next. Rank 5 requires 2 level 5 Noble Knights. When Xyz summoned, you can target up to 3 Noble Arms equip spells with different names in your graveyard. Equip those targets to this card. Once per turn, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card, target 1 other monster on the field, and destroy that target. If this card is sent from field to graveyard, you can target level 4 or higher Noble Knight in your graveyard and special summon that target. Removes monsters, gets equip spells, and floats. So it's fantastic. Just like Custennin, his removal threatens to float into something else if stopped. And that something can even be bringing back Charles. It can be bringing back Brothers for loops. Very versatile card. In addition, like the rank 4, which we'll get to in a second, he equips a bunch of equip spells which can give protection for resolution of his effects, such as Destiny or Excalibur, or you can get, let's say, Durandal and Joyous, so you make him get Durandal, search something, get Joyous, recycle something, very versatile. And when you're done with him, you link him away and float into something else. Rank 4 Arthur, Artorigus, King of the Noble Knights, does not have the float effect, but does have the target 3 Noble Arms and equip them. Just like rank 5 Arthur, this is a very good effect on its own, but his other effect is, once returned, detach a material, destroy any number of spells and traps on the battlefield, up to the number of Noble Arm spells you control. Very good for just clearing large amounts of back row off board. In addition, because you can destroy the re-equipping equips, you can use it to move these 5 from where they currently are to another. and that's used for moving Gahaton and Clarent, which you can equip to him from grave, onto Charles, for example, if you want to go for the double 4K direct attack. Those are all the Xyz monsters, so next we're going to get into the Synchros. First up, Infernoble Knight Captain Oliver. Very cool card, unfortunately not good enough to warrant into the tight extra deck, so we don't typically run him. But when he declares an attack while equipped, you can target a face-up card on the field and destroy it. And during the main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, target one warrior monster you control, special summon this card from your graveyard as a tuner, and if you do, equip that monster you control to this card as an equipped spell that gives it 500 attack. It's cool that you can bring the tuner back out for additional plays. He's level 5 that comes from grave for rank 5 plays, which is cool. He just requires setup and isn't typically something you're going to be putting on board, especially because you have better options. Speaking of, let's do Ignoble Knight of Highland Swain next. This card is run at 1 in most builds. I've actually cut it for space because he doesn't come up that often for me, but he does come up and he's pretty cool. When Synchro Summoned, you can equip one Noble Arms equip spell from your deck to this card. That means you can use him to grab a rotor like Durandal to get Flint Lady into a Sold. If you're using, especially relevant if you're using non-warrior tuners like Adhara, which some builds do. You can use it to get stuff like Clarent if you need to, if you just have this in deck, and or maybe you synchro him with Malji to put it back in deck, and you just need to get some damage direct, like your opponent's low but has a big wall of blockers. He can go into Clarent for direct pokes. Really cool utility monster. Just the extra deck is very tight. If this card destroyed a monster by battle at the end of the battle phase, he can also search Noble Knight or Noble Arms cards. He's arguably the most versatile searcher in the deck for that reason. It's just hard to resolve that effect. So yeah, I mean, run one if you want. I'm not running one at the moment, though. Infernoble Knight Captain Roland is something you make on the way comboing up. You're typically run 1. Older builds did run 2 to summon off 5 racks, but tight extra deck. When Synchro Summon, you can activate the effect that during the end phase, send an equip spell from your deck to the graveyard, then add one warrior monster from your deck to your hand. And then during the main phase, if this card is in your graveyard, quick effect to equip to a warrior you control as an equip spell that gives 500 attack. So this is typically going to be the main thing you use to equip on your opponent's turn to trigger the next card, and the search is used to set up materials for turn 3. So like often, you'll get a search off a Sold and a search off Roland, and you can get 2 monsters that work together for turn 3. So like you can get a Boars and a Gawain for a rank 5, or an Xyz play, or if, let's say a Gearfried and a Renaud for a fire play. Great to use in tandem, and we work to develop combos when possible to make this on the way up to Infernoble Knight Emperor Charles. The boss monster Noble Knights have wanted since they first released Disruption. So, if an equip card becomes equipped to a monster on the field, and this can be from anywhere, including if your opponent uses equips, even during damage step, you can destroy one card on the field. It is non-targeting destruction, relatively easy to trigger on a big beater. Very good effect. During the end phase, and this is either end phase, you can equip one equip spell from hand or graveyard to this card, then equip one Fire Warrior monster from your deck to this card as an equip spell that gives it 500 attack. Each effect is once per turn, but this means that when you make it, if you make it with Oliver having been a tuner on the way up, that's targeting protection. You can then equip another protection, let's say Oliver, and you can equip another protection, or you can equip one of the Infernobles to threaten their grave effects if they remove Charles through a Kaiju. Absolutely fantastic card. So, that is all of the members of the archetype. A little exhausting to go through them all. And in the next chapter, we will discuss how you ratio them for building a deck. Gwenhwyfar, Queen of Noble Arms, is a monster that acts as another Noble Arms card you can use every turn from grave. You can target a Noble Knight monster you control, equip this card from your hand or graveyard to that target. You can only use that effect once per turn. The equipped monster gains 300 attack, and then, if it is a light monster, it is also immune to... Oops, I want to trim that.